Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Julia. I was an admission officer at Haverford College, an outside reader for Emory University, and I currently work at Milton Academy, an independent boarding and day school outside of Boston, Massachusetts.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. Good morning, friends. I'm very excited to meet with our listening family. That's my definition for those who never miss an episode. And our sporadic listeners, excited to meet with you as well today. Weather is absolutely beautiful here in Fairburn, Georgia. You know, we all claim Atlanta, but actually only 10% of people in the metro area live in the city. So I'm in Fairburn, Georgia. And today we've got a few updates for you. And I kid you not, when we first started the podcast in February of 2018, I would check our stats like 5, 8, sometimes 10 times a day. I know. I got a little OCD in me at times. Then after the years go by, like you don't even remember about your stats. But just this morning, I was like, snap, I wonder what our stats are like. So I pulled them up and looked at them, and we blew through the 1 million downloads about 5 months ago. That's how long it's been since I've checked our stats. And I know some podcasts get like 1 million a month, but that's a lot of people, especially when we barely hit 200 in our first month. So thank you to every single one of you who has spread the word and told others about our podcast, whether that's just personally in your friendship group or social media. Thank you. I'm also back on my weight loss program after a 2-month winter hiatus. And boy, that 2-month winter hiatus took a toll on me. I actually went up 8 pounds, but I've lost 5.6 this month. So I've almost got rid of those 8 I put on over the winter. I'm still down 23 since I started this back in July, but I still have 57 to go. I'm exercising the most I have in years, and it's really just this big landscape project. You know, we took a little over an acre in our back, and I'm pretending I'm pseudo landscape architect out there trying to make it look beautiful. And I really like it. A lot of times, honestly, I'll be out there for hours and I forget about food. And I've never done that in my life. Even when I played sports, I didn't forget about food. So I guess whatever it takes, right? Well, in today's episode, I'm going to share 2 responses that came in from listeners. One is a text message that came in that I'm going to read, and the other is a Speakpipe comment. And both of them really moved me. And I think that they're going to move you as well. Next, Julie and I will have a very important discussion on double depositing. Now, you're going to have to listen to learn what double depositing is, but it's the fear, the dread of every admission office that students are out there double depositing. And my conversation with Julia is pretty lengthy. It's close to 40 minutes. Normally, I would have run this over 2 episodes, but it's just real time sensitive, and I wanted to get this information in your hands as soon as possible. And warning, friends, Julia gets a little spicy. You have to listen to see what she means when she says, show up and show out. And then we'll have our final part of Lisa's interview with Elizabeth Hamlet on how students with disabilities can successfully transition to college. But first, there's only one day, that's right, one day until we are all going to be treated with the wisdom for 1 hour question and answers with the real pro, Karen Christoph, 37-year admission vet, dean, 5 schools, different regions of the country. And it's your opportunity to do what I get to do, which is talk to leaders like this in the world of college admissions directly. And for everybody who attends that session, they're going to get a video of both that session and the Andy Strickler session, which we did last month. To sign up, just go to yourcollegemykid.com, go to the events tab, and sign up. And leave any questions you have in there. Now, I will be sending a Zoom link out Tuesday by 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to those who have signed up in the last 24 hours. And those who've already signed up should have already received the link. If you didn't get the link for some reason and you signed up, actually text me, please, at 404-664-4340. 404-664-4340. I want to make sure everyone who wants to be there is there. Now, before we get into today's episode, Jeffrey Salingo, who is definitely on the A list for top experts in the world of understanding this higher ed space, not just admissions and financial aid, but trends, competitors, all different types: grad school, professional school, business school, law school, med school, undergrad, community college, just the whole higher ed space, a comprehensive look. He's on the A list of experts in this field. And he put out a tweet early in the week, and this is what he said. This is going to get bad fast for a lot of small colleges. Today, Moody's downgrades Muhlenberg College. Outlook remains negative. 7 straight years of declining net tuition revenue. Now, I responded to that tweet, and I said, we're going to talk about this on Monday's podcast. That's today's podcast, episode 428. The post just resonated with me because it kind of combines so many of the themes we continually come back to on this podcast. But instead of me taking 3 to 4 minutes, which is all I was going to do, to talk about that tweet, I've got something better for you. How about an interview with Jeff Salingo about the tweet and much more? So I'm going to interview Jeff Salingo on the topic of how you can know if a college is financially healthy. It's a question we are repeatedly asked by our listeners. You know what? Let me not make it future tense saying I'm going to interview. I already did the interview with Jeff Salingo. I did it a few hours ago. I'm coming to you Sunday, and I did this interview from 9:30 till a little 10:15 or so, Sunday, May 5th. And you're going to hear it over the next 2 Mondays. So episode 430 and 432, or if you go more by dates, in terms of when the episode will drop, May 13th, May 20th, right here on YCBK. And if you're someone who likes to kind of get into the weeds about the finances and knowing how you can know if a school is healthy, then that interview is going to be for you. So I'm going to reserve my comments because I'd rather you hear his comments. He's the one who put the tweet out. So you have to come back the next 2 weeks for that. Okay, friends, let's look at the 2 messages that came in from listeners that I feel deserve some commentary. The first was a text, and I got this from a mom from the Midwest, and it just resonated with me. I thought it did a masterful job at explaining why so many people find college admissions so confusing. So let me read it to you. And by the way, I don't want you to think if you shoot me a text, it gets read on the air. If you send a Speakpipe question or comment in, it will go on the air. But if you ever send me a text, of course, I'm going to get permission from whoever sends it before I just go blasting stuff out to an international audience. So I did get permission from the texter, I guess that's a word, the texter, to read this. So here's what it says. In today's podcast, you mentioned that parents ask for what the secret formula might be to get in. It made me think about my discussions with my husband about whether or not figure skating is a sport. He would argue that it can't be a sport because it's subjectively judged. I countered that many of the elements have a rating system, and therefore a base score could be figured by an objective rating system, and that the subjective part was only a small portion of the overall points. He had a strong distaste for the fact that someone's personal opinion about how something was done could influence such a high-stakes outcome. And he didn't have any investment in the person on the ice. But when it's your own kid, your protective instincts really kick in. Part of the frustration parents feel is that each school has a different rating system. And by the way, we get into that next week with Salingo as well. And we don't get to know what it is. Every big paper or project comes with a rubric of where the points get earned. But in the college admission process, we are told, be authentic, and it depends. So people feel like they're on a cross-country road trip without a map. You can ask people along the way how to get there, where you're going, but all you can do is trust that they know what they're talking about. Did you catch those analogies? Figure skating and judges and college admissions rubrics, which are subjective, on a cross-country road trip without a map. I just wanted to say, friends, we feel for you as listeners. We know you love your kid with every fiber in your being. There's almost nothing you won't do for them. And all this can feel so confusing at times. And I just wanted to just acknowledge that we hear you and we're doing our best to try to unpack it to the best of our abilities. The second message came in from Speakpipe, and it was on a completely different topic. And friends, you know, because I shared this with you last week, I've been struggling with how to handle the college campus conflict. I felt like if we're talking about the real issues facing colleges, how can we not discuss just this tempestuous conflict on college campuses that's spreading from coast to coast? I mean, you guys know my daughter, Joy, works at UNC Chapel Hill. I mean, it impacted them this week. She called me about it, and she usually works from home on Friday, and they said, we're going to need you to come in because some people might need to talk to you. I need some counseling support. So there's that voice in my ear. But then another voice in my ear whispered, anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are both horrific. But I don't know the issues well enough to talk with intelligence. I don't know when I'm listening to the media if I'm getting media bias or if they're filtering things through their perspective. I just don't feel knowledgeable enough. And so I was conflicted. Am I just going to make it worse by speaking out? And so what I like about this next message you're about to hear is it gave me a permission structure to not feel as if I have to address something when I feel like there are other people out there with more knowledge than I that can speak to the topic. So listen to this, I thought, profound insight from one of our faithful.
Hi, this comment is in response to episode 426. And I want to say that I've been listening to your podcast for the past year. I discovered your podcast through a friend, and I have a daughter in 9th grade, and I find your insights to be really spot on, interesting. It's fascinating to see behind the curtain of what's happening in the world of admissions and college applications and what you're seeing in your experience, to hear you talk to professionals in the industry. This content is great. I love it. Keep it coming. Now, on episode 426, you had a little aside about the campus protests. I know it's a difficult issue, and I could see where you feel conflicted personally because you feel like you have to opine or you have to speak out about it. I want to encourage you that you don't. Okay? You really don't. You want this to be inclusive, right? You want to have a diverse audience. So just tell them this is a college admissions podcast. If we talk about politics, it's going to be in the context of the college admissions process and where universities fall. But you don't really need to have an opinion on current events. Just leave that to just say, listen, it's outside our scope, like you did. Say it's not my area of expertise, which you did. You don't have to apologize for it. It's actually a plus. I think it's a benefit of listening to your podcast to not have the same political views that are being foisted upon us by mainstream media, by social media, by every cable news channel, and a lot of personal conversations. I'm inundated every day, and your listeners are inundated every day with politics, politics, politics. You don't need to talk about it. Stick to the good stuff, right? Focus on what makes your podcast unique and special. And lean into that. Matt Levine in his Money Stuff column does this very well. He says, look, I know that you're all going to want me to comment on X, Y, or Z thing like George Floyd. That's not what I do here. I strictly talk about finance and financial issues. So I just want to encourage you. You could do the same thing. Take this or leave it. It's feedback, but it's just something I wanted to hear that while you have people that are probably writing, sending you notes and saying you need to talk about X, Y, or Z thing, that's probably a vocal minority of your audience. The majority of your audience just wants to hear about college admissions. Okay, keep up the good work. Take care.
Okay, friends, let's dig in with a very important conversation about what double depositing is. Hey, Julia.
Hi, Mark.
So I just wanted to take a question, Julia, and I thought that you would be a really good person to talk to. This is a non-Speakpipe question. So let me say something because I know this is confusing. We don't generally take non-Speakpipe questions on the air, and there's a few reasons for that. One is it would take 5 hours to reply to all the questions that get sent in via email. It's just not 5 hours we have in our week. And we really like the community vibe that comes from hearing everybody's voice. Like it just adds listening family quality that we like to the podcast. And certainly people have not had a problem doing it because we're about to hit our 200th. So we generally do not do that. But there's one exception, and that is if I'm getting asked something a fair amount in working with students and families that I know it's out there, then I will bring the question. And that's kind of the only way we do non-Speakpipe questions. So this is part of a prelude to what I'm going to say and transition. And please don't break my heart because it's kind of hard. It hurts me when people send these questions in because it feels kind of cold to say, love to answer it if you do speakpipe.com, but it just kind of tugs on your heartstrings a bit. But I said all that to say we need to talk about double deposits. I'm getting asked a lot of questions about double deposits, and I think you're an awesome person to discuss this with. So, Julia, why don't you first tell our listeners what double deposits are and tell me what your thoughts are on it from an ethical standpoint, and we'll just kind of have a conversation.
Sure. Certainly the conversation du jour, more so than any other time in my career in this particular admission cycle. So the general, sort of rule of thumb, though we're realizing this is not necessarily codified in a standardized way anywhere, is that on May 1, which is the national reply date for U.S. colleges, is that a student should select a college by 11:59 p.m. May 1st. And they can only select one college and deposit at that college. The vast majority of colleges, to save your spot, if you will, to enroll in the class, to matriculate, you need to put down a deposit. Sometimes that's anywhere between like $50, more generally around $300 to $500. There are some schools that don't have any money as a deposit, but for us, I believe we're using the term deposit as I decide to save my spot and I'm enrolling there. Some colleges do put this in their acceptance letter and or enrollment information when you do select to enroll. But this is generally in the NACAC ethical practices area, but it is not at all ethical or encouraged to double deposit. So that is to say yes to more than one college on May 1. So double deposit is generally, especially as a counselor, that puts me in a really tough position as a school-based counselor who is a member of NACAC. I am supposed to encourage my students to follow the guidelines, and that I'm supposed to counsel them to never double deposit. And by the way, when we say double deposit, we also mean more than two as well.
Not triple or quadruple. You can't say I quadrupled, so I'm out of that.
And so I take what I'm learning from as we talk about this with the podcast family. I'm learning I'm a little tougher maybe than some other counselors, but I've been lucky. I've never had a student do that to my knowledge. But if I did, especially after having a conversation with a student where I was really clear that you cannot double deposit, I would potentially notify the schools that my student had double deposited at if I know that they are doing that willfully and violating those guidelines, especially if it's in the college's sort of enrollment information. And then the Common App actually also includes language about this, that a student is only to deposit at one college on the reply date deadline.
Julie, let's talk about some of the reasons why students want to double, triple, quadruple deposit.
Yeah, and I'm not to say that this is like a nefarious, like terrible thing that people do. Oftentimes I've heard it sort of out of ignorance, or I will be honest, it is a little weird, y'all, that you spend an awful lot of time researching schools, applying to schools, waiting for your response, and then you ostensibly maybe have, or at best have 1 month to make a decision as to what college you're going to.
I caught that y'all, by the way, Julie. I saw your little brief stint in Atlanta popped made its way into the vocab.
It does. I do like, I like my gender neutral language as well too. So that's
there you go.
And I'll say this, I use folks, and students don't really like folks. I'll say that.
It's folksy.
Yeah, it is. So, I have had students who literally just didn't feel like they had enough time to go visit every school that they got into, especially my boarding students, right? And so they're just like, oh, I need more time to make a decision. And so sometimes students will think, oh, I need a little more time. But I like these two schools a whole lot equally. I just need a few more days. So let me save my spot at both. And it is true. Colleges don't know that. Like, so when I worked at Haverford and someone deposited, I only knew that, well, actually Haverford has no deposit fee. Thank you, Quakers. But I wouldn't know if they deposited anywhere else, right? That's not information that's shared. It's not something through the Common App or anything like that. So, and then sometimes I've had, especially in this year, which is why we're talking about this, is that sometimes students still have incomplete information on the May 1 deadline. And this year we are seeing that obviously with financial aid. And we'll get into the weeds more about this, but also competing deposit date deadlines, where generally in every other sort of cycle, it's a May 1 hard and fast deadline for every student for U.S. colleges. But so sometimes students need a little more time to compare financial aid packages, appeal financial aid packages. I've actually, even though this is my first time really having so many questions about double deposits, I would say every year I work with students who do get reply date extensions because we are still appealing financial aid packages. They got their response 1 month earlier. We then appeal a bunch of packages, and not every financial aid office is ready to have a finalized award within a month's time. But generally, I'm pretty lucky where I can appeal to our rep or the financial aid office at a certain school and get an extension on the deadline for a couple of days. So even for students comparing financial aid awards past the May 1 deadline, there is still no reason to double deposit. You can go call and get an extension. Though it's not always real that a college will grant an extension. And we've run into that this year, which is really sad. And so there is a feeling to double deposit to make sure students have, as much time as they need, but save their spot if they're still waiting on complete information about if they can enroll and afford the college.
And another reason that I've encountered this year is just the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and the tumultuous campuses, and wanting to see whether or not an environment would be a safe space for Jewish students. And just kind of like, what if I commit and I give up all my options, and then really bad stuff happens, and then I'm stuck. And so that's another one. So can you talk about what double deposits do to a college? If they think somebody's coming, and sort of the things that get set in place as a result of that, and why the policy is something that is seen as really ethical because of the consequences that it can create on the college side. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. So it's a really delicate dance, enrollment. So some colleges quite literally have a position in admissions that is about enrollment. And even at small liberal arts colleges, we're talking about very few spaces to play around with. Colleges have a very careful understanding of how many dorm rooms and dorm beds they have, how many spots in a major, how many spaces in a college within the university, all of these things. And they also think about too who's going abroad, who's not going to be on campus. It's a very careful dance, in which also includes some fun data about trying to project what numbers they need to be at in order to enroll a full class. And I really appreciate, by the way, Charlie Lazar, who is at Occidental, did a great presentation at NACAC about just the really delicate sort of things you need to consider when enrolling in class. So for him, if you are 1% off your target number of enrolled students, that can mean close to millions of dollars. So as your tuition dollars really do count, friends. And so it can mean that a college is unable to plan. They think you're coming, so they've sort of, taken that off the table. They're planning around if you're going to enroll, if you're going to live on campus, what major you're going to be in, where you're going to be on campus, what seat you're going to take up in terms of the schools. And then you decide to enroll elsewhere. That upsets the apple cart quite a bit. And then it also is not fair to your fellow peers who are maybe on the wait list, right? It means that there could have been a little more room in the class if they had known that, but maybe it's now too late and somebody else is already enrolled and can't give up they really don't want to lose their deposit money. And so even if they wanted to go to that school, they can't afford to double deposit, which would be the ethical way to do it. They'd unenroll from the first school and then enroll at the next school. But it's really unfair and unkind to your peers who are especially practicing that, and then also perhaps are on the wait list, which really kind of messes it up. And obviously, if we allowed for double deposits, it would just be the Wild West out there, right? Then no college would know who was coming after they spent an awful lot of time determining if you should be admitted and where you should be admitted at the college. So if everyone did this, then we would have no projections of enrollment numbers. Colleges would miss their budgets, they would over-enroll, they would under-enroll, and that would also mean disaster for students who are currently enrolled in the college. It's got to be, if we all stick to this rule and act ethically, then everything should work out. But the minute we kind of upset the apple cart, it's a real slippery slope, and it doesn't really allow, it can create financial and enrollment issues for the college.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I say to my families a lot. Like, I'm sure you find your 18-year-old's behavior to be mercurial at times. Well, think if you're a college and you're trying to predict what 5,000 18-year-olds are going to do, and you can't over-enroll or under-enroll. Like, it is just a Herculean task in and of itself, getting the right number of heads in beds without under-enrolling or over-enrolling. That's just without double deposits.
Right.
So you start throwing double and triple deposits in, and, just imagine the problems that you're creating for a school. I'm going to go off on a tangent a bit. And by the way, I apologize to our listeners. This is something I wish that I would have done this maybe in April instead of start of May. So this will probably be most beneficial to parents, of sophomores who are listening and juniors rather than seniors and freshmen. But there's still some May 15th deadlines out there this year. There's some June 1 deadlines out there. And also, if somebody's a senior and they did double deposit, hopefully they can retract it immediately. So I still wanted to go ahead and run with this. But one of my absolute pet peeves, and I encountered this quite a bit this year, Julia, with my students, is I was unable to be as successful as I would like to be at convincing students that when you're not going to a college, please tell them as expeditiously as possible. They may go to their wait list and take somebody, but they're not going to do that I mean, and it's not quite that simple, right? I don't want to make it sound like it's a 1-for-1. Like schools work off their yield projections and that, but in principle, they're holding a spot and hindering somebody else that could have that spot. And let's say you think, well, I'll get around to it eventually. I had someone, the other day, and I've been telling them to do this for a long time. They said, I'm going to do it around May 5th. And I was like, May 5th? Here's the thing. National Candidate Reply Day, Decision Day, May 1st. People have committed elsewhere. And if I have some passion on this, it's because I just have scars from my admission days on this. They're still painful. So you go to your wait list because you get a lot of refusals, and then your wait list is committed elsewhere. And they committed elsewhere conceivably because they didn't know you were going to come through, and they might have committed to you had you been able to go to your wait list earlier. So I'm not saying when you're still in doubt and there's still a possibility. I would even say if there's like a 5% chance, then you don't need to do it. But let's say, like, this is typically what I see. Let's say I have a student, and let's just say they applied to 12 schools and they got into 8. And of those 8, there's several in there they know there's no way they're going to pick that school over some of the other. Cut them loose.
Yes.
Please do that. It's in some ways, it's similar principles from the standpoint of how it impacts a college's ability to plan. So let's talk about something that can be confusing. What if a student deposited somewhere and then they get off the wait list at another school? Are they ethically allowed to go to the school they got off the wait list when they deposited elsewhere? Can you talk about that for our listeners, Julia, and why that's different?
Right. It does get a little confusing. So,
yes. Talk about how that's different.
Yeah. So unfortunately, with the way the wait list goes, is that in other application cycle years, the vast majority of colleges do not go to the wait list before May 1. And a lot of them, if they do go to the wait list, it tends to be late May to early June because they've had to crunch all the numbers of the students who did enroll by the deposit deadline and realize where they might have space. So unfortunately for a lot of students, what that means is that you do need to sort of forfeit a deposit. So I have plenty of students this happens to each year. So May 1 comes around, maybe they're on the wait list for a couple other schools. They deposit at a school they were admitted to. And then maybe 3 weeks later, we get a lovely call from the college that one of the colleges they're waitlisted at, offering them a spot and they would like to take it. So often colleges will give students a few days to decide if they would like to accept a spot off the wait list. So a few days goes by, my student decides to accept a spot. That is okay as long as and they must do this immediately, is that they need to unenroll from the college they did deposit at. So that can often be a email to the main admissions email or your rep if you know them. If it's still available in your portal, sometimes you've become a full-fledged student, so your portal has transitioned to the student portal at the college. But you need to let the college know right away, and you need to make sure they've received receipt of that notification. What I tell students is sometimes you feel bad about unenrolling. Don't worry, that's okay. They might be bummed to see you go, but they are happy you let them know, and then they can plan for the future. They oftentimes, a college will also ask a student where you did decide to go to and where you got off the wait list. So if I always tell my students, when you're communicating with a college that you did deposit at May 1, please say, like, thank you so much for the offer of admission. While I enrolled in the class of 2020, whatever it might be, I got off the wait list at this institution of which are being enrolling. Therefore, please remove me from the class. Something that is just really clear. That is technically, even though you did double deposit, you deposited at the school you got off the wait list and you deposited at the first school on May 1, you're only enrolling at one of those schools. You've removed yourself from the other class. But unfortunately, it does often mean that you don't get your money back if you deposited. And a lot of colleges this year have moved to, if they didn't offer an extension deadline past May 1. Some of those colleges offered a no deposit, sort of as a consolation of, hey, we know that there's competing deadlines right now. Hey, we know you might be waiting on some information from other colleges for financial aid. We're still sticking to the May 1 deadline, but you don't need to put down any money. Therefore, if you do disenroll from this class, hopefully no money was lost.
And I understand how this could be confusing. Like, okay, so it's unethical to double deposit, but it is ethical if I get off of a wait list. It's just an understanding that everybody has amongst each other that it could happen to everybody. And waitlist activity normally happens, after the May 1 deadline. And so there's an understanding that, if you were to get off the wait list, then that's an exception to the policy of, I deposited once and now I'm going to deposit again to the school that I waitlisted at. So that is an exception. Let's get into the weeds and talk about something thorny. What if a school, what if you're up against May 1 and a school is being really firm about their deadline, and then another school, let's say there's like financial complications with their process and they're asking for additional information. So, and that other school you'd rather go to than the first school, but you don't want to turn around and lose both options because you don't commit to the first one. And then now you've missed the deadline and your space technically is freed up to be given away. And then the other school who you're hoping to go to, they come back with something that's unsatisfactory financially, and now you don't get either option. Do you think that would be an exception, or do you still think the double deposit, principle you laid out there before is like rigid, no exceptions?
This is where I think communication is really important, and I do think this is different than double deposit, provided you've communicated this. So I have about 8 students in my 43 student caseload that this is what is happening. So we've got, I have, in a lot of these situations, there's one college on there that had a May 1 deadline and the rest had a May 15, and we don't have finalized financial aid packages from the May 1 college or the May 15 or June 1 colleges yet. And because the other colleges had a May 15 or June 1 deadline, the May 1 college basically said sorry, we won't extend your, I know that you're still working with our financial aid package, but we can't wait around for the other colleges. Like, we still have our own numbers to meet. In that case, I have been, as a counselor, and I really hope any school-based counselors who are listening to this, really, I know it takes a lot of time and it's heartbreaking, but I've just gotten on the phone and stayed on the phone. And I really appealed to colleges and just said, we don't have a financial aid package from you, or even if we do, we need to wait for these other ones. How can you ask a student? It's like buying a house. How can you ask somebody who doesn't know how much a house costs to go ahead and buy a house and then take on that mortgage, right? So it can be a little heartbreaking, but I have found that I've been successful with, maybe they say like May 8th instead of May 15, but then I'm going to call back and say, hey, we still don't have a package from these other schools. So I really would just hope that if you're a student, your guidance counselor, if you're lucky enough to have a college counselor, to really just get in touch with your admissions representative, who it's usually the admissions side that determines if you can get an extension in consultation with the financial aid office. So I do think it's important to start with the admissions rep to ask for an extension. And then if they need to refer you to, I have found that actually in these appeals that weren't granted right away, or not appeals, but asking for reply date extensions, I find that if I do that over email, I usually get a stock answer. So I call, and then I'll appeal to the person above the rep. I'll appeal to the director of financial aid. what the worst that's going to happen is I've annoyed people, right? But it's important to me that my students are able to make the right decision. And I'll be honest with you, I've had some students have to make some heartbreaking decisions because colleges are not at all bending for the reply date, even colleges that haven't provided a financial aid package for students. So I really, and this can be totally done by the student as well. I just really show up and show out. Honestly, you've been admitted. No one's going to rescind your admission for asking for an extension for a very good reason about finances. I even have a student, for example, who is not a financial aid candidate, but is up for an ROTC scholarship that they got, but they need to transfer it to the school, right? They were awarded the ROTC scholarship at a different college. So while we wait for the transfer, while it should work out, we don't have guarantees. And that's college would not budge on the reply date for us. Because the student technically the student is not a financial aid candidate, but it could mean that they go to college for free at a very expensive college. So I just say for students, like, link up with your parents, but really continue to appeal if no one's giving you an extension. But besides these couple, sort of nightmare situations, I'll say this, by and large, even if a school hasn't extended their deadline, I've been pretty successful getting extension for my students, and or a lot of them will say online, like, hey, we're sticking to the May 1, but here's where you can request a reply date extension. And shout out to those colleges. I'll be honest, like shout out to Babson. We asked for an extension like on April 30th, and you have to go through a special email. They answered us within an hour and granted the extension. So as much as it might seem hopeless, or it seems like, oh gosh, who's going to answer this? Please try. Please try on getting an extension for financial reasons.
Yeah, there are a couple of things Julie said there that are important. All of it really was important, but there are a couple of things I want to accentuate. One was that you as a family can do this because, there are things, Julia, with your 43 on your caseload that another person that's at a school where they have 500 on their caseload.
Right.
And the counselor is more of a guidance counselor that's mostly doing personal counseling, crisis counseling, logistics, schedule changes, doesn't have the knowledge and the wherewithal.
Or the bandwidth.
Or the bandwidth. That's the situation most people are in. So it's so it's important. I don't want people to hear and say, well, I don't have a Julia or a counselor with 43 on my caseload that's been on the other side of the desk in multiple capacities. You can do this yourself. And I know people may be wondering, like, why would they be so rigid? Like, why would they do that to me? And, I try to explain this sometimes. Sure, nonprofits have a mission, and it's a, philanthropic mission. It's a mission around serving and making a difference in the lives of people. But they're first and foremost going to be concerned about their own survival and their own health. And there's going to be some schools that are just going to be like, you know what? I may not be able to meet my goals and answer to my stakeholders if we start making all kinds of exceptions. And at the end of the day, if I don't hit my numbers, I don't have a job, and I'll imperil the financial health of the institution. If you ever get a chance to really talk to senior level people in admissions, they will talk about how much pressure the job is, because almost every school is tuition dependent. Right. And literally the salaries of the faculty, staff, administrators are dependent on the admission office hitting their number. And I've had more than one senior person tell me, like, I don't know how much longer I can do this because it's just a lot of pressure. So I'm not justifying it, because anything that's not student-centric, we're always going to push back on. But there's a difference between justifying and maybe trying to understand why some schools do what they do. Like, sometimes the pressure is literally immense. Friends, imagine the weight of the world that's on your shoulders. You've got a friend, let's say they're in the philosophy department, they teach, say you play golf with them, you play chess, you play bingo, you bowl. You know that they could get laid off if you don't bring in enough net tuition revenue. That's a lot of pressure that, that they're under. And you guys, you see nice, sweet Julia, but Julia's feisty Julia when somebody's messing with one of her students.
Yeah.
She's Julia on a warpath.
Yeah, look out.
out, and I've seen it in action. I think it's awesome. Anything else we haven't talked about around this topic? Uh,
The one sort of thorny thing that we've talked about as well is sort of I just I just want to be clear with listeners about the ethics of this is that I do also have a handful of students that are unable to make a decision by the May 1 deadline, but they had they did make a deposit at one May 1 school, but it is very possible they may choose a school that has a May 15th deadline. So, for example, I had a student who didn't get all of her decisions until April 15th. And so only had 2 weeks, and she's an international student. So really only had 2 weeks to and she didn't even get to visit most of the colleges. So she had 2 weeks to really make a decision. Of all of her colleges, most of them had a May 15th deadline, except one, of which is like a very close second to what she thinks is her first choice. So in order to make sure she didn't lose that spot, she did deposit at a May 1 school and is now using these 2 weeks to figure out, is that second choice really my first choice? And what she'll do in that situation is that by May 15th, she will unenroll from the May 1 school if she decides not to go there, and then enroll in the May 15th. So she's not double depositing, but she might make 2 deposits. And she's not alone in that. So this is unique to this year because of the competing reply dates. But I know that has come up for me from families, and that they were like, is that ethical? Can we say yes for now? But then if it turns out that's not it, or it doesn't work out, my ROTC student, if the scholarship doesn't transfer, then we have to enroll at that other school by May 15th, right? So I just want to be clear, there's that sort of behavior going on, and that's okay as long as you unenroll from the May 1 school you deposited at, and then deposit by a May 15 or June 1 school.
Jay, I thought about something. Have you encountered a situation where when you follow up with the school and you talk to them and you tell them about, this other school is not notifying until May 15th, that the school wants to know who that other school is, and that they're almost like taking yield into consideration? Because a lot of times schools may not want to extend time if they feel like, oh, so are we really just the backup for this other place?
Yes.
And can you talk about that and give people any tips on navigating that? Because that could be really difficult to navigate that conversation if you're doing this on yourself and you're not used to that kind of pushback that you may get. Can you talk about that?
Yes, and to be honest with you, my experience with this is really for students seeking financial aid awards, and so on some level, a college knows like, oh, maybe they're not really that interested in that school, but they have to, if that school can give more money than we can, I can understand why the student's looking at that. But even this year, it's been really interesting. I have actually learned about some wait list information from a school that isn't the school taking the student off the wait list. They said, oh, we had all these students unenroll and say they're going to this school instead. So definitely colleges are paying attention to that. What I'm hopeful for is that in this particular Wild West year, that it's not going to be like, let's say, so it can matter as a school-based counselor. It can matter if a college maybe admits my students all the time and then none of my students ever enroll, right? It is totally fair for that college to say, like, what's the point? Like, we keep getting all these Milton Kid applicants, but no one ever enrolls, and we admit them all. Like, why should we admit them? Like, and, save spots for them, and then they never come. I am hopeful that won't be the behavior of colleges this year, because there's so many other competing issues, and it's not simply just about yield, and it's mostly about financial aid in these situations. Where I do find it actually works in our favor is that, and I want to shout out one of my strongest, most mature, savvy students ever. She wrote one of the best emails to a school that she had received financial aid packages and better financial aid packages and quicker responses from peer institutions of the school she wants to go to, but also institutions that have a far less generous financial aid policies, or far less large endowment. And, she said in a very mature, professional way, but in a kind of like, whoop kind of way, she said to this college, I would consider, given your endowment and your peers who are able to do this, that you should be able to also extend my reply date deadline. It was awesome. So I have seen that actually was effective. We had one school that I love. We talk about it on this podcast all the time. For whatever reason, they were not budging on their May 1 deadline. And when we said where else the student had gotten in and where else the colleges had extended their reply date for the student, they extended their reply date for the student.
Yeah, you also have the advantage of you are a school that sends a lot of kids to these places, and colleges have an incentive to want to keep the Milton, college counseling office happy. Otherwise, they might feel it's not this stark, but I was going to say that faucet could get turned off, but that you might be less likely to refer. You know what I mean? If you're that ticked off with how they handle things.
Totally.
And that gives you a certain amount of leverage that somebody individually may not have. But boy, this has been a really nuanced conversation. I think we got into the weeds. I think I'm a little more empathetic. Oh, no, that's not the right word, because you're empathetic, Julia. I'm a little bit more nuanced if the money hasn't come in yet and it's purely being done over finances. And I know you are as well. I mean, I don't think you excuse it, but we've talked offline. And I know that when someone's not going to get the same financial package, my sense is you don't think it's as egregious of a violation. Is that fair to say?
Totally. If money is involved, I'm all good. Even if we make a misstep, I find it forgiving. I'm all good. It's really, and again, for the listeners, there's incredible wealth at Milton. And so the reason I can get real feisty is that we're not talking about someone who's like, oh, maybe this is a little less than the other one. I'm talking about students who don't need to worry about money whatsoever. And so I'm not, and they had all the resources ahead of time to visit these colleges, to look at them. So those are the students I really do not have patience for when they're asking for reply date extensions or doing something a little funky about double depositing. But you're so right, Mark. When it comes to money, I think, and I also think colleges are super forgiving. When it comes to money, you don't want to mess around. And so any maybe missteps you make, I think, are pretty forgivable.
Yeah, awesome. Let's close with that. Great discussion as always. Appreciate you. Thanks, Julia.
Good luck out there, everyone.
Good luck. All right, let's hear Lisa's final segment in her interview with Elizabeth Hamlet.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, hope you're enjoying this interview as much as I am. But in part 3 of Lisa's interview with Elizabeth Hamlet on Pathways for Success for Students with Disabilities, Liz talks about the level of independence students need to be successful when they're on their own and away from their parents. Lisa tells a story about her own transition to college. Liz talks about how a family can evaluate the level of support that a college offers, and in doing this, she debunks some commonly held myths. Liz shares some questions to ask when evaluating a disability services department. Liz shares how people can learn more about the services and resources that she provides, including her book, her website, her YouTube channel, and her Reader's Digest 6-page guide. Finally, Liz goes on the hot seat, and we get to know her outside of being a disability service expert. Listen and enjoy.
Starting to pull back on the things that parents are doing to fill in those gaps can be illustrative. And again, I think if you have a student who really starts to tank, you need to have a conversation with them about what this is. Because, imagine this at college, especially if they have a typical experience where they go and they live there. Not everybody does, but if you're going to go live in a dorm, and again, nobody's going to wake you up. Nobody is going to escort you to class. If you are going from one building to another, because that's often the case in college, and you see a friend who says, hey, let's go goof off and go do this, nobody's going to be there to say, oh, don't you have a class at 3 o'clock? They're on their own. I talked about meals specifically because I talk to my own college students that I work with a lot about, you guys need to eat. You need to, you and I are laughing, but like, you need to sleep, you need to eat, because your brain cannot run on empty. And so, kids have, again, showing my dinosaur, my credentials here, students have a lot more access to food than we did back in the day. Sort of back in the day, if you missed the dining hall, that was kind of it. But, they're still going to have better choices to eat from in the dining hall than if they wait and the convenience store, there's DoorDash or whatever. So, and they need to make time for it. So all of this stuff is really important too. If you have a student who is constantly up until 2:00 in the morning and crawling out of bed, I don't see how that student's very well positioned to monitor their own sleep habits later.
True. Yeah. And I think that, as you say, that darn prefrontal cortex, if it was just installed a little earlier, wouldn't it make all of our lives a lot easier, right? Because,
right.
Sometimes they can't, even though like you and I, it's the most obvious thing in the world, but obviously you need to eat and get sleep. It might not be to a teenager on certain days. So it's a tough thing for parents to negotiate.
I saw something online once that made me laugh so hard. It said, all these young people on the positive side walking around with their water bottles. I don't remember drinking water even once during college. And I thought, yeah, that sounds right.
I don't remember having a water bottle either.
No, we didn't have water bottles. And, I'm pretty sure when I got out of my parents' house and could have soda, at lunch and dinner, I did so.
Right. Yeah, I know even for me, and I would say like, executive functioning has always been something I've been reasonably good at. But my first year in college, it was a rough go for me, to figure out how to learn how to, make myself go to bed and not stay up until 2 a.m. in the dorm, messing around with my friends and, leaving time to study. There was no homework calculator back then, I'll tell you that much. And I had a hard time with it. It wasn't until I got really sick, physically ill. I got so run down. And then I realized, I cannot do this. Maybe the other kids can do this, but I can't do this. And at that point, I turned myself back around and started structuring myself. But, it's not intuitive, I guess. It's not obvious.
And I think, look, even our most academically capable students go off places and have to make adjustments. And I have a friend who says, well, C's get degrees, and they do. But I still remember trying to read half a psychology textbook before the midterm because, you're supposed to read it every week, and I just didn't. And so, same thing. I stayed up late writing some papers, and about junior year, I finally thought, wonder what would happen if I started this paper a week ahead of time. And papers got better, and I was not staying up late. And, I was able to figure that out. So again, some of your neurotypical students are not going to figure that out. And some of your students with disabilities already know this about themselves. So, let's not, we can assume that some of them have got, I work with students who really know what they need. And they come in really well prepared. And they just know they're going to have to give up some time on the weekend, because if things take you longer, and again, the extra time that they might have had in high school has gone away, then they know they're going to have to. And it's only one weekend, and it's only this time. And so, that's part of adulting, right?
Yeah, yes, it certainly is. So when families are looking at colleges, and let's say they've determined okay, this college is a good social fit, it has my child's major, we can afford it. How then can they go start evaluating all the different things that college might offer in terms of support?
So they can start, students can start with the websites. So this is going to be a part of the conversation where I interrupt myself and make caveats 15 different times. So let me apologize in advance. And the reason is, people sort of make these declarative statements that worry me. So people say, well, if I go on a website and they don't have a list of accommodations, then I assume that they're not really looking to help students. Yeah, so these are the things I hear. Let's be clear that colleges sort of buy these templates for their website, and DS offices don't always get a chance to put everything up that they might like to. They're also pretty busy serving their students, and so website design and details may not make the list of things that they get to. I think I would go with all the positives and not with the negatives. And what I mean is, if you get to a site that's really built out and they have all sorts of helpful information, that is an office that's taken the time to do that, and that to me seems positive. But I don't think that the opposite is necessarily a true either. That if they didn't, it's because they don't want to have anybody contact them or serve them. They just may simply not have time to do that, and you'd much rather they be serving the students. So, which leads me into, if you want to talk to a disability services office, your student can certainly call and ask questions. They should not expect that somebody's going to be able to drop what they're doing and give them a half an hour, and this is part of adulting, right? They may have to make an appointment and be prepared with their date book, so to speak, of when they will be available to do this. They should prepare questions ahead of time so that it's a productive conversation. And on my website, well, actually it's off of my website because it's on Google Drive, and I will send you the link. I have a form that guides students through, poking around these sites, things to look for, questions to ask. And I've also done a video where I demonstrate this, and I've got a written post as well. So lots of different ways, for suggestions of things to be thinking about. So you can see, if they have a list of accommodations. Again, if they don't, it doesn't mean they don't give them all. And nobody could literally list every accommodation that they offer because there's all sorts of them. You should be able to see when you poke around, do they go beyond the minimum? So, for instance, UMass Amherst in Massachusetts, I know, does offer students appointments with somebody they call a learning specialist. So that is something they don't have to do that goes beyond. Do they have special social events for students registered with the office? Do they have a special study space students can utilize if they'd like? So it only matters if it matters to the student. I think so often it's like everything. I mean, I have 2 young adult children who've been through college, and just taking the college tours with them, I would say, oh, look at this, campus center you could do. And my kids are rolling their eyes and probably never use the campus center. So I think sometimes parents are way more interested in what's in the office, and that's okay too. If your student just needs to get their accommodations, then they can probably get what they need anywhere, and it doesn't really matter. But also be aware that sometimes the supports are going to come from elsewhere. So again, disability services offices don't provide tutoring. Don't go looking to our sites for those. But make sure that the school has a tutoring center. Is it free? Do they cover a variety of topics? What are the tutoring arrangements? Is it 5 students to every 1 tutor? Is there a writing center? Look at the counseling center. And, a lot of students now are being very out and about with their mental health needs. And sometimes they're coming to school with a counselor already in place, a therapist that they can hopefully continue to communicate with, on Zoom or whatever. But for those who are thinking, well, what do I need a counseling center for? It could be nice to know that they exist. And how do you get an appointment? How long can you see them before they refer you out? Is there a health center? Because one of my kids went to a school that didn't have one. Can they refill your prescriptions? So these are all things to start to look at.
That's such great advice. And I would love the link to that document you mentioned and to your website so we can put that in the show notes for people, because that's a really great resource of how to kind of think systematically about what you need and how to find out what the school offers. And that just sort of brings me to, you've provided us with so much great information. Where can people learn more about you, your book, your services? Tell us how people can find you.
Oh, thanks so much. So I have a website, and it's ldadvisory.com. So LD as in learning disabilities, ADVISORY.com. Speakpipe.com. And Lisa's watching me look up as I spell this out loud. I always have to try to be careful. So if you go there, you will find free resources. And as you pull down on the menu there, so there's college transition related resources. I have several dozen posts about all accommodations, documentation, advice from disability services directors, for parents, for professionals, for students, some anecdotes from people who have made it through college about what that experience was like and what was helpful. There's also in that drop down for free resources, copies of all the tools that I use with my own college students. They're all there for free for people to access. So you can share those with your student. And then I have a YouTube channel with lots of, short videos I've made, for social media, but they kind of live there. And I just reach out to people who do nice things. And so college consultants who have done webinars on college readiness, college applications, college searches. There's an assistive technology webinar up there. So, there's lots of free resources. But if you want a comprehensive one, my book is out. It's doing really well. So if you go to my website and just click book, you'll see all of the purchase options, including the link and the code to get 20% off from my publisher.
Ooh,
so
I always like my coupon.
There you go. Yeah. And so I also have a 6-page Reader's Digest version, if you want, by a different publisher that I think makes a much better resource for students. I did not write my book expecting students to read it. They certainly can if they wish to, but I'm really good with them just reading the 6-page guide. And remind me, Lisa, and I will send you a code. So I will create a special code. I have 2 on-demand webinars. One that is my overview webinar that I do for lots of different groups and school districts, but you can watch it on your own time and download the handouts. And another one that's really focused on academic accommodations at college and goes into a lot of detail about what we approve and why, and what we don't approve and why. And so I will get you those codes.
Oh, fantastic. I love codes. And these are such amazing resources. And I know our listeners are going to be taking advantage of them and so appreciative. So I so thank you for coming on and sharing all this with us today. But you're not out of here yet because you have to answer the hot seat question.
Oh, okay. And she did not send these to me in advance.
No,
so you know.
I don't send them in advance because I just think of them on the spot. So that is how
I'm glad I'm sitting down.
This is. So let me ask you this. So obviously, you are very successful in your career and we all need you. We need learning disorders consultants. But if you were going to do something else, what would you do?
Does this assume in this question that I have the skills to do whatever I want?
Oh, absolutely. You can do whatever you want.
Okay, what would I do? I would really like to be a professional dancer.
Oh, fun. What kind of dance?
Probably, Broadway just seems exhausting. Maybe video background dancing. So I have taken dance classes my whole life, and that's my favorite form of exercise. And I love dancing in a group. So I'm just too old for ballet at this point. I do like jazz. So I'm thinking that lends itself to Broadway. And then I'm like, ooh, 2 shows, on Sundays and Wednesdays. Plus those people stay up too late for me. So yeah, how's that? Video background dancer.
In my imagination, I'm a fabulous tap dancer. I've never tap danced in my life. But, in my fantasy life, I'm perfect. So I totally get that. It would be very fun to do that.
I'm also tall in this scenario.
Well, that's great too.
I mean, if we're going to go for it, right? Let's do it.
No, why not? Why not have all the things in your fantasy life? All right. So, and then let's see. So what is your favorite movie or TV show that you've been watching recently?
Okay, recently. Ooh. So good. Okay. I saw American Fiction, which I really, really enjoyed, and I'm still thinking about. And as far as TV goes, my husband and I have jumped on the wave. We started Suits. We never watched it when it was on. And as a writer and somebody who likes to read and loves mysteries, what I do like about that series is that there's this sort of, ebbing and flowing of conflict, and sometimes things that happened, 10 episodes come back. So as somebody who doesn't write fiction but writes, I love that idea that people have thought so far ahead of things and, bring back these plot lines. So
yeah, it's amazing how talented people are and how creative and how they can think
yes.
in advance. I can't even figure out what I'm having for lunch, much less plan the solution to a murder mystery that has not even been written yet. So I'm in awe of people like that. Okay, so here's something. What is the best advice that anyone ever gave you?
Oh, such good advice. I've been very lucky. I've had a lot of good advice. But most recently, the thing that sticks out, I worked with a sort of business coach, and she said to me, and this is a very privileged thing to say, so let me start by saying that it was sort of agonizing over certain kinds of work that could be available to me, but I didn't want to do for various reasons. And she said, so don't do it. And again, I work very hard at other things. So not doing that work meant I had to pick up some other work, because that's life. But, it was just, I was trying to sort of be all things to all people, and realized that it wasn't making me happy doing that particular thing, and that I could do a lot of other stuff and still make a difference.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. I find in my therapy practice, I'm always telling people, why don't you just give up? Why don't you just stop doing that? Why don't you just quit? And they're just looking like, what kind of therapist are you telling me to quit? But I'm like, you know what? If you're cooking 7 meals for your kids and they won't eat them anyway,
oh gosh,
why are you doing it? Don't do it. Just give them the macaroni and cheese, because that's where you always. So I think there's something about just knowing your limits and knowing what you really like to do, and just doing those things if you can.
Right, exactly. As I said, it's a very privileged position to have. And I do some other stuff I don't particularly enjoy because I don't do that other stuff, but it pays the bills. And so, I guess it's about making those choices, right? And it's getting rid of or taking the lesser of two evils.
Yes, I believe it is the lesser.
Yes.
2 evils, yes. Well, this has been a wonderful interview. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your expertise with us. I'm sure if you have any other topics, we'd love to have you back at some point in the future if you want to, dig deep into one of these points or talk about something else. But yeah, thank you so much. I know this is going to be great for our listeners.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
On Monday's episode, let's call it the extracurricular episode. I will continue part 2 of 3. Joined by Hillary Dickman from Colorado College, Vince Garcia from California, Susan Tree from Philadelphia, and from Julia Esquivel from Massachusetts. So 4 co-hosts, and I almost should call Hillary a co-host. She comes on and offers great insights multiple times a year. All of us will continue with part 2 or 3 of our conversation about the do's and don'ts about filling out the Common App activity section. And I'm calling it the extracurricular episode because our Speakpipe question is also about ECs. That's right. A listener wants to know how are extracurriculars evaluated, not for well-resourced, not for under-resourced, but for middle-class families. So Julie and I will be discussing that. And then we'll have a brand new 4-part interview I'm very excited about. It's about how homeschool applicants are evaluated by colleges. And this is a special interview because we have 2 homeschool experts from the counseling side. We have 2 homeschool experts who are actually writing a book on homeschooling and college admissions, Dr. Michelle Evard and Holly Ramsey. And they'll also be joined by an admission officer from Beloit College, Liam Daly, who is an expert in college admissions and specializes in working with homeschool students. And our college spotlight, we told you we were coming back again, and Michael Keaton would be back. And he's the VP of Enrollment at Ursinus College. Julie and I will be talking to Michael about Ursinus College over the next 2 weeks. And friends, if you're a regular listener, you know one of my favorite interviews I've ever done, I also did it with Julia, was with the VP of Enrollment at Texas Christian University, better known as TCU, Heath Einstein. He's a great guy. Actually, he wasn't the VP of enrollment at the time we interviewed him, but he's since been promoted and currently is the VP of enrollment. It's not easy to get an internal promotion like that. But anyway, I want to close with some words of wisdom. When I asked Heath Einstein the question, what is your best advice for students, parents, and college counselors? Listen to what Heath has to say. All right. And the last question is your best advice for three groups of people: students, parents, college counselors.
My best advice to students is, as you consider where you will go to college, imagine yourself as a rubber band. And you want to go somewhere that is going to stretch you, perhaps to places that you didn't expect to be stretched, but not to the point where you break.
Ooh.
My advice to parents is that you have only one job in this process, and that is to love your child. And at the end of the day, if your feelings toward your child have anything to do with the bumper sticker that's going on in the car, then you may cause irreparable harm to that relationship. So just remember to love your children and to tell them that you love them. And to counselors, my advice is have enough wine for the whole year, because you're probably gonna need it.
Think about that one, and see you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.